Hello, thrill seekers. Welcome to Real Crime Stories, the channel that plunges you into the heart of spine-chilling mysteries, true crime cases, and unsolved enigmas that defy explanation. Today, we're unraveling a gripping collection of stories that will haunt your thoughts. If you're hooked on suspense and can't get enough of these eerie tales, smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to never miss a video. Now, brace yourself, let's dive into the first bone-chilling story. I've been a small-town cop for 12 years. There's one case that still scares me. Being a cop in a small town in Minnesota probably isn't the most exciting career there is, but it's not bad either. It's actually a relatively peaceful and safe line of work, compared to being in law enforcement in one of the big cities. New York or LA, for instance, where the action is. There's only around 10,000 people in the town where I live. It's way out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by miles of open farmland, and the only real crime that ever occurs is pretty minor stuff. The occasional rowdy rednecks getting into a fist fight at one of the 3 bars downtown, teenage vandals, petty theft, the odd drunk driver, a case of disorderly conduct here and there, the rare breaking and entering, that sort of thing. The only real serious stuff I've ever had to deal with is a couple cases of domestic violence and assault and battery. But even that's pretty typical, I guess, and it doesn't happen very often. Well, that's not entirely true. There was one case that still haunts me, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Like I was saying, I live in a pretty peaceful little town. Boring, some would even say. The kind of rural, out-of-the-way, hick farming community you've probably driven through on the highway yourself, on the way to someplace more interesting, without as much as a second thought or a glance back. The kind of place where nothing out of the ordinary ever happens, you've probably thought. And for the most part, you'd be right. But there's one case I can't get out of my mind. One case that still makes my blood run cold whenever I think about it. One case I can't explain no matter how much I try to rationalize it to myself. What happened to the old Garrity woman 7 years ago? I'd been a police officer for 5 years when it happened in the early spring of 14. There were only 5 cops on the entire town police force. Me, my partner Jerry, Pete and Vance, who both worked the night patrol, and the police chief. Plus Karen, an older woman who was a retired librarian and worked part-time as the dispatcher. The police department was located in the town municipal building and consisted of 2 offices, one for the chief and one for the rest of us to share, and 3 jail cells in the rear, and the 3 of them were all occupied at the same time. It was an overcast, rainy afternoon in late March, early April. Me and Jerry were in our cruiser on a routine patrol around town when Karen's voice came over the radio telling us there was a possible 10 to 82 in progress at the Garrity house on Turner Road. For those of you who aren't in the know, a 10 to 82 is police code for a burglary. We acknowledged, then changed directions, heading for the Garrity home. I wasn't unduly concerned about the call. I already had a pretty good idea who had made it. Eileen Garrity was an elderly widow who lived in a rundown farmhouse on the outskirts of town. She was probably around 65 or 70 years old and had lived alone since her husband had died of a stroke 3 years before. They had 2 adult children, but they both lived out of town and never visited her. Since her husband's death, she had developed something of a reputation for being eccentric, to put it nicely, or crazy, to put it not so nicely. She was a shut-in who rarely left her home and had her groceries delivered once a week. Basically a crazy cat lady, minus the cats. The reason she was considered crazy was because she had become pretty flaky and paranoid since being widowed and had called the police department on multiple occasions for everything from hearing intruders moving around in her attic, seeing UFOs in her cornfield. There were probably at least a dozen others too. All her calls turned out to be false alarms, of course. The burglars she claimed were hiding in her attic turned out to be a pair of raccoons that had slipped in under the roof, and the UFOs were probably just jets flying overhead from the National Guard base 50 miles west. Me and Jerry and Pete and Vance had all visited her home before during our respective shifts. We never got frustrated with her or gave her a hard time about it, and usually indulged her, inspecting her house and property to calm her nerves. She'd relax, thank us, we'd leave, and the process would repeat itself in a couple weeks or a couple months. Honestly, our infrequent trips to her house were probably the only real highlight of what was a rather dull and unexciting job. When we told the chief about Mrs. Garrity's latest emergency Bigfoot was sneaking around her yard, or there was a giant anaconda lurking in the basement, he would just shake his head sadly. When Vance and Pete were the ones who had to deal with her, they'd tell us all about her most recent ordeal when me and Jerry saw them at the end of their shifts and the start of ours. They'd usually smirk in a mean-spirited way, and Pete would twirl his finger next to his temple before they left. Jerry and I just felt sorry for the old woman. It couldn't have been easy for her, a frail, nervous, lonely woman, living all alone in that old crumbling house with no friends or close family. I suspected she might be getting senile, or maybe entering the early stages of Alzheimer's or dementia. We worried about her living there by herself, almost a mile from the nearest neighbor. If her health suddenly turned bad, or she had an accident and couldn't call for help, well, there wasn't really much we could do about it. A couple times, I looked up the numbers of her daughter and son, and tried calling them about possibly placing her in an assisted living home or a mental health facility. But the one time I managed to reach her son, as I was explaining his mother's situation to him, he interrupted me, telling me he was too busy at the moment and would call me back, then abruptly ended the call. He never did call me back. From then on, they always happened to be unavailable, and never answered any of the voicemail messages I left them. So Jerry and me turned onto Turner Road and drove up to Mrs. Garrity's house on the gray, rainy late spring day, certain that the old woman was just overreacting yet again to something relatively minor, and her imagination was playing tricks on her. She was waiting for us outside on her porch when we pulled to a stop. I'll never forget how she looked. It shocked me. She'd already been a thin, frail woman the other times we had been out there, but we hadn't seen her in probably a couple months, since her last false emergency, and she had changed drastically since then. Now she was gaunt, almost emaciated, her cheeks hollow and dark rings around her bloodshot, sunken eyes. Her gray hair was tangled, and didn't look like it had been washed in days, maybe weeks, and the dress she was wearing was wrinkled and dirty. Her physical appearance was alarming enough, but there was also something about the way she was staring at both of us with those dark, dull eyes that seemed to look at us, through us, and past us all at once. It reminded me of old photos I had seen of American soldiers in Vietnam. The blank, expressionless, shell-shocked look of someone who had been through more horror than any ordinary person should have to endure. Me and Jerry exchanged a shocked look, then got out and approached the old woman. "What seems to be the trouble, Mrs. Garrity?" Jerry asked her amiably, trying to keep his voice nonchalant. "There's something in my house," she told us in a flat, toneless voice. She was shaking slightly, a woman on the verge of total physical and mental exhaustion. We did a routine sweep of the first floor, guns leveled, then headed upstairs. It only took about 5 minutes to check out the house. We had done it so many times before we had the layout down pat, and there was no sign of any intruders or evidence of a breaking and entering. But I saw plenty of other things that disturbed me deeply. For one thing, the place was a total mess. The house was already pretty decrepit, but Mrs. Garrity had still taken pride at how clean she kept it, and it had always been spick and span on our earlier visits. Now dirty dishes were stacked high in the kitchen sink. The counters were dirty, and trash and dirty laundry littered the floors. The way she phrased it, not someone, but something, made me raise my eyebrow. "Well, you just wait here, and we'll go have a look and make sure it's safe," I told her, trying not to sound too patronizing. I looked to Jerry and nodded. We drew our pistols and stepped past Mrs. Garrity, cautiously entering the house. I also noticed that Mrs. Garrity's pillow and blankets were lying rumpled on the couch in the living room. The surface of the coffee table in front of it was cluttered with half-drunk cups of coffee, open containers of food, a Bible, and a rosary. It looked like she'd been eating and sleeping in the living room for some time. When we went upstairs, sure enough, the bed in Mrs. Garrity's room was bare, and the room itself looked like it had been vacant for quite a while. There was also something in the living room that really alarmed me. Leaning in one corner was an old double-barreled shotgun that had probably belonged to her late husband. Jerry picked it up, broke it open, and found 2 spent shells in the chamber. He took one out, sniffed it, then told me the gun had been fired very recently. We also discovered something else bizarre. All the mirrors in Mrs. Garrity's house had been shattered, and every closet door had been boarded shut. The one in the front hall on the first floor had a huge hole blasted in the center of it, smaller holes pitting the splintered wood around it. You didn't need to be Sherlock Holmes to deduce that Mrs. Garrity had fired her husband's shotgun into that door. But why? What the fuck had happened here? Jerry shot me a perplexed, questioning look. I shrugged, clueless and equally bewildered. Finished with our inspection of the house, we put away our pistols and turned around to go back outside. Mrs. Garrity was standing in the room behind us, staring us at with that unnerving blank expression. Both of us almost jumped a foot in the air, startled. Neither of us had heard her enter. Jerry regained his composure and flashed her a fake, reassuring smile. "We don't see any sign of him, Mrs. Garrity. He must have slipped out the back. You're safe now." She didn't relax or appear relieved like she had the countless other times we had humored her. Her face seemed to twitch, and some new look dawned in her eyes. It took me a moment to identify it. It was a look of pure, hopeless doom, mixed with utter terror. "No," she said in that same odd, listless, flat voice. "I'm not safe. It's still here. It's hiding. That's why you couldn't find it. And after you leave, it'll come back for me." Then she began to quiver. She started to cry with total despair, breaking down into hysterical sobs that racked her whole body. Jerry and me looked at each other, concerned. We went to the old woman and comforted her as best as we could, guiding her over to her couch and sitting her down with us on either side of her, coaxing her gently back to a state of calm. After she had herself back under control, we asked her to explain what had happened. She was quiet for a few moments, gathering her thoughts. Then she began to speak. As we listened to her story, my body temperature seemed to gradually drop, and I felt a chill envelope me. Several times I made eye contact with Jerry, and his expression was a mirror of my own, disbelief and fear. "It started about a month ago," she began. "That's when I first heard the scratching at my closet door. A soft, slow, steady scratching that seemed to come from inside her bedroom closet at night. At first, she had assumed it was probably a mouse or some other small animal. Except the scratching seemed to come from too high up to be the work of a mouse. Whenever she opened the closet door, always after the scratching had ceased, there had been nothing there. Several times she had started to open the closet door, the scratching was in progress to get to the bottom of it once and for all. But each time she had grasped the knob, she had been overwhelmed with a sudden, overwhelming, irrational sense of unease, and had been unable to do it. The scratching sounded too deliberate, too gently, too deceptively harmless, as if something was trying to lure her into opening the closet door. To be safe, she had started locking her closet door at night. Over the next several days, the scratching had gotten louder and more intense, as if something was trying to tunnel its way through the wood. One day, she opened her closet door and found claw marks on the other side. Claw marks that were 6 feet off the ground. Claw marks that looked like they had been made by fingernails. The horror had really started for Mrs. Garrity about a week after she had first heard the scratching sounds. One night she had awoken to a voice softly calling for her. A voice that seemed to be coming from the locked closet door. She was bewildered, even more so because she recognized that voice. It belonged to Bill, her dead husband. Bill's voice had pleaded for her to open the closet door, telling her that God had sent him down to take her up to heaven where they could be together again, and young, like they had used to be, forever. At this point, Jerry had looked at me, wide-eyed, from the other side of the couch. "Then what happened?" I prodded her gently. "I thought I was dreaming," Mrs. Garrity said. "I thought it had to be a dream. Poor Bill had been gone for 3 years. And since I was having a dream, I didn't see no harm in doing what he was asking me to. I got out of bed and went to the closet. I reached for the lock, but then I stopped. Something didn't seem right. It was Bill's voice and it seemed perfectly normal, but somehow it was wrong too. The way he was talking .it wasn't like how Bill used to talk. It was like a stranger was using Bill's voice, trying to trick me into opening that closet door. That doesn't make much sense, does it? Actually, nothing she was telling us made sense, but we just asked her to continue telling her story. Actually, nothing she was telling us made sense, but we just asked her to continue telling her story. Bill, or whoever, or whatever was using his voice, had continued to beg her to unlock the closet. When she had refused, the voice had changed, becoming harsh and belligerent. It had angrily demanded she open the door, and when she had still refused, it had begun to shout at her, using profanity and making obscene threats. Things Bill never would have said to me while he was alive, before beginning to pound violently on the door. The voice had begun to change, no longer sounding like her late husband's. It had become deeper and distorted until it didn't sound human. In terror, she had fled her bedroom and spent the night on the couch downstairs. Eventually, the pounding and the threats had stopped. Mrs. Garrity. Jerry politely interrupted her at this point. Why didn't you call us at the police station when this happened? She was silent for a moment, then a small bitter smile formed on her lips. I thought you'd think I was just imagining it, she told us. I know people in town think I'm a crazy old lady, and I've had you all out here so many times before for things that turned out to be nothing. I thought maybe it was all in my head and I didn't want to bother you about it. Things had escalated pretty quickly from there. The pounding and threats had continued every night. She had been too scared to sleep in her bedroom and had started sleeping on the living room couch. Then one night the pounding had begun, not just on her bedroom closet door, but all the closet doors in the house. All at the same time. Like there were people in all of them trying to get out all at once, she told us. But it was the same voice in every closet, the same horrible voice. In fear, she had nailed all the closet doors shut to keep the thing, whatever it was, from coming out to get her. Then, about 2 weeks ago, something even more terrifying had happened. She had been in her bathroom and was washing her hands in the sink. When she had looked up into the medicine cabinet mirror, here she paused. What did you see? Jerry asked her. I saw it, she said in a choked whimper. I saw its face instead of my own. It was wearing a black robe with a hood, and its face was just a grinning skull, a skull with horns. Its eyes were red, the eyes of the devil himself. I don't mean I saw it standing behind me in the mirror, it was in the mirror itself. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. It reached out of the mirror, it didn't have hands, it had claws, and tried to grab me. In horror, she had thrown a bottle of lotion at the mirror, shattering the glass. Then, to be safe, had done the same to all the other mirrors in the house. How could you stay in this house with all of that happening to you? I asked her. She shrugged sadly. I don't have anywhere else to go, and no one who'll take me in. The nights were awful, but it was always better during the days. At least then I could get some sleep. It always stopped by morning and never happened during the day. She suddenly shuddered. Until 3 days ago. Then it started happening all the time, day and night. I wasn't safe no matter what time it was. It had all come to a head late this morning. The pounding had gradually gotten more violent and forceful until all the closet doors were rattling in their frames. Mrs. Garrity knew that even with the boards nailed over them, it was only a matter of time until that thing broke through. In desperation, she had begun praying and reading from the Bible, which had only caused the entity in the closet to laugh at her mockingly. Finally, she had gotten out Bill's shotgun and fired it through the closet door. For a minute or so, there wasn't a sound. She told us. I started to think it was finally over. Then, I saw those red eyes burning in the dark, in the hole the shotgun had made. It chuckled, and it said one word to me. What word did it say? I asked her. Tonight, she said, and began to tremble. She lowered her head into her hands and began to sob again. Jerry and I were silent for some time, trying to absorb what she had just told us. We looked at each other, deeply troubled by her story. Neither of us actually believed it, of course, but it was obvious the poor woman was deeply disturbed. She was having some kind of nervous breakdown. Maybe her frayed grip on reality had finally snapped, or maybe old age was taking its toll on her mind. One thing was clear. It wasn't safe for her to be alone anymore. Especially not here. It was not healthy for her. Hell, for all we knew, maybe her paranoid delusions were the result of some dangerous form of mold that had formed in the house. Jerry and I excused ourselves for a moment, then stepped outside to talk in private. We both agreed she needed help. She needed to be institutionalized, but for now, it was best she stay somewhere else. We went back in and told Mrs. Garrity she was coming with us. She was going to spend the night in a motel room in town. And tomorrow, Jerry added, we were going to find a priest who would come and exorcise the evil spirit that had been bothering her, getting rid of it once and for all. She broke down again, this time crying in relief, and hugged me and my partner, thanking us over and over again. We drove her to a cheap motel in town and checked her in. Her mental state already seemed to have improved in that short amount of time being away from that house. She smiled and told us she couldn't wait to finally get a night of decent sleep without having to worry about that thing banging on the doors. I think mostly she was just glad she wouldn't have to be afraid anymore of the entity she was convinced was lurking in her house. We both smiled at her and said goodbye, getting in the cruiser and driving away. Our smiles faded as soon as we pulled away from the motel. We both drove in, grim silence. We both liked old Mrs. Garrity, in spite of all the time she had made herself a nuisance to the police department with her bogus calls and her erratic behavior. We were sorry her mental state had deteriorated to such a point that she could no longer look after herself. We told the chief her story when we got back. He sighed sadly and nodded, agreeing that she had to be committed somewhere. Tomorrow, him and me were going to drive out and personally visit her son and daughter and explain to them what was going on. And if they still refused to do what needed to be done, the chief would see to it himself that Mrs. Garrity got the help she needed. But we never got the chance. The last time we ever saw Mrs. Garrity was when Jerry and I left her at the motel. Around 4 a.m. the next morning, I was awakened by an urgent phone call from the chief, telling me to get over to the motel as soon as possible. He wouldn't say why over the phone, but I already had a hunch it had something to do with Mrs. Garrity. I felt an awful sense of dread as I got dressed. I wondered if maybe she had taken her own life in her motel room after we had left her. When I arrived outside the motel, my fears were confirmed when I saw crime scene tape blocking the door to Mrs. Garrity's room. The chief, along with Jerry and Pete and Vance, were gathered outside, along with a couple cops from the state police and a pair of detectives from the city. The chief greeted me with a grave expression as I approached. He told Mrs. Garrity was gone. At first I thought he meant she was dead. Then, seeing the solemn look on my face, he clarified himself. She was literally gone. I looked at him, confused. I saw something in his eye I'd never seen before. Something that caused a ripple of fear in my heart. The chief was scared. He told me he didn't know what to make of it himself. People in the neighboring rooms had heard blood-curdling screams and sounds of violence coming from Mrs. Garrity's room around 2 a.m., then nothing. They had called the police department. Pete and Vance had been the first to arrive. They had pounded on the door, but there had been no response. They had forced the door open. When they saw what was inside, they had called the chief himself. "What did they find?" I asked him. "Maybe you ought to come see for yourself," he told me, leading to the doorway and under the crime scene tape. He explained to me that they had found no sign of forced entry, and that the door and windows of the motel room had all still been locked from the inside when Pete and Vance showed up. I took a look around, feeling a shiver run through my body. There was fresh blood splattered around the room. On the walls, the floor, bed, even the ceiling. The blood-stained bedsheets had been ripped away from the mattress, as if someone had desperately tried holding on to them as they were pulled out of bed. There were 10 very thin trails of blood on the carpet, leading away from the bed. 10 thin trails of blood that had been made by 10 desperate, terrified fingers clawing for purchase as their owner was dragged away. I followed the bloody finger marks across the floor, away from the bed, to where they ended, at the closet. I looked at them, then I looked at the chief. He looked back at me, his face hard and impassive, but fear gleaming in his eyes. I approached the closet. The door was standing open. I stood there, looking in for some time. The closet was empty. Completely empty. There wasn't even blood on the floor. They never found Mrs. Garrity. Story. I'm a homicide detective. My latest case is the most disturbing I've ever come across. My radio came to life as sound crackled through the speakers. Immediate assistance needed at the park on Grande Ave. Unidentified woman attacked and in critical condition. Grande Ave was only a couple of blocks away. I turned the car's ignition on and picked up the radio while clicking the side button. Copy that. On my way now. Any information as to the nature of the attack? That's a negative, was the distorted reply. I backed the car out onto the road and made the short journey to Grande Ave. Even from the distance, I could hear the wail of other first responders quickly heading over there as well. Whatever the problem was, it seemed to be big. After a few minutes, I pulled up to the scene and with a quick flash of my badge, crossed the police tape. I made my way past the ambulances and other first responder vehicles to where a group of people, dressed in their correlating uniforms, stood huddled around a singular area. A police officer looked back and seemed to recognize me, probably from the academy, and stepped back to let me take a glimpse of what was causing the commotion. I whistled through my teeth. There was a woman lying on the floor. Well, the only way I knew it was a woman was because I was told so. The woman that laid before me was so disfigured, it was impossible to tell what she actually looked like. She was covered in thousands of toothpicks, every single one embedded deeply into her skin. Streams of blood flowed through each incision, coating her entire body red and covering the ground near her. And yet she was still alive. She was very obviously and painfully breathing every couple of seconds. A nearby paramedic informed me that it wouldn't be the case for much longer. We can't move her. It just drives the toothpicks into her skin further, which increases the problem. We can't remove them either, he said solemnly. Why not? I asked. He looked up at me, and for the first time I saw the fear in his face. That's just it. We can't. The toothpicks all have a barbed spike on the tip, meaning the only direction they move is downwards, and we don't want that. We've tried to insert a catheter to induce artificial respiration, but we can't get that in. He gestured wildly towards the woman. There are toothpicks up her damn nose. I stared at the woman a while longer. I looked at her chest heave as she struggled to take a breath before coming back down again, pushing the toothpicks further into her skin, which increased the already alarming rate of blood flow. I looked at the paramedics who were coming to the slow realization that this person was going to die a slow and painful death, and there was nothing they could do about it. I had seen many things in my career, but this took the cake. I used to pride myself on staying calm during any situation. I was able to stay stoic and take control of any situation, but this time was different. The brutality of the attack made my insides feel like a swirling mess, threatening to spill out of my mouth if I wasn't careful. Everything about this just seemed so wrong. The human body wasn't built to be treated like that. There was an internal instinct to run away from this, stemming from a primal fear ingrained into my brain. But I couldn't. While the situation filled me with such a fear of the unknown, I had to stay. I had a job to do, after all. I turned back to the paramedic. How was she found? He sighed. Exactly like she is now. A passerby called emergency services. We've tried to help her in any way we could. But he trailed of the end of his sentence, his gaze shifting into the distance. Is there anything else I should know? I asked. He looked back at me, but not directly. His eyes appeared foggy and seemed to linger at a faraway point, without really comprehending what he was looking at. Grief, I assumed. Yeah. There were a couple of items found beside the body, he finally said. He left to go get it, and came back with a both small piece of folded paper in his hands and a small silver wristwatch, which he passed on to me. The watch caught my attention. It seemed familiar. Well, I suppose all silver chain-link watches with 3 faces look the same, but this one seemed different, somehow. The weight and the feeling of metal against my palm seemed to awaken a long-forgotten memory in the back of my mind. I could see myself holding this watch, years ago, and sliding it onto my wrist. Or someone else's. I turned the watch over. 2 simple letters were engraved on the backside of the watch face. 2 simple letters that made the color drain out of my face and made the world seem as if it was collapsing on top of me. 2 letters that I had put there 6 years ago. A.E. Alice Edwards, my sister. She was presumed missing over 3 years ago, after she left her house to go for a nighttime jog and never came back, leaving behind a grieving husband and a 4-year-old daughter. The search was given up eventually. There was no leads and no witnesses. How do you begin to find someone who's vanished? With my mind clouding up with questions, I made my way back to the body. I forced myself to look past the blood and the toothpicks, and the sight of mutilated flesh. I looked at the eyes, the only part of the body not completely covered in toothpicks, and collapsed into fits of tears. Because in that moment, I knew. The eyes were bloodshot and lifeless, but I had seen all I needed to. The woman on the ground before me was my sister. I thought she was dead, and now I had seen her die. Without even knowing her true identity, I turned my gaze away from her and from all the others. All of these events were too much to process, and I knew I had to leave the scene, or risk having a breakdown. In that moment, the pain was too great, and the tears too strong. I nodded to the policeman guarding the tape, and crossed it once more. As I left, I became aware of a piece of folded paper in my hands, given to me by the paramedic, as it was also found near the body. I opened it up. What do you think of my little hedgehog? If you like this, don't worry. My zoo has only just begun. I'm a homicide detective. Apparently things can get a whole lot worse. When you're in the business as long as I've been, you're bound to see some messed up shit. Trust me, I've seen it all. An unfaithful husband angering his wife to the point where she commits a murder-suicide? Check. A young woman pushed into the path of an incoming train by an obsessive stalker? Check. My sister bleeding to death after being pierced by thousands of toothpicks, which caused the killer to so aptly call her the human hedgehog. Check. As you can probably tell, it's that last case that I'm dealing with currently, trying to figure out how the hell the killer managed to get away with it. I mean, if you think about it, nothing adds up. For starters, the toothpicks had to have been inserted at a secondary location, prior to her being transported and left for dead at the park where she was found. All without any witnesses. And then comes the question of the toothpicks themselves. The paramedics at the scene found it impossible to move her, as it would drive the toothpicks further into her skin, increasing the blood loss. How did the killer manage to do it? Well, I actually did have an answer for that question, but it was something I didn't want to think about. The toothpicks were probably inserted one at a time, over a period of several months, possibly years. Let the wound heal, and then move on to the next toothpick. Which brings me to my final dilemma. Why? What did the killer gain spending months of their time piercing the skin of my sister? Why was it my sister in the first place? I don't know of any reason it would be an act of revenge, so it may have been a murder of opportunity. Just pure chance it was my sister, which made it hurt even more. It was definitely a shock discovering she was still alive after all these years, and seeing how she was treated only added salt to the wound. I was grieving, yes, but the killer mentioned that my sister would only be the beginning, and so solving this case would be my utmost priority. I couldn't let this happen again. True grief could come later, and so I sat in my office, sliding my sister's watch over my wrist and milling over these facts, with the first step to discovering the killer currently in my hands. A day after the killings occurred, a birthday card containing an address was mailed directly to me. Forensic work indicated that the handwriting on it perfectly matched the note left at the crime scene. While getting a handwritten birthday card was interesting in itself, it still raised a lot more questions. How did the killer know I took up the case? Were they at the crime scene that night? Maybe they knew it was my sister that they had killed, and were now targeting me. As usual, nothing made sense. But still, an address was an address. And in my line of work, you take notes like that very seriously. I thumbed over the birthday card again, looking at the cartoon giraffe telling me to have a tall someday. Yeah, birthday card puns are strange. I analyzed the address inside again, looking at the word 12 Baker Street, as if they may have some hidden meaning that I hadn't discerned yet. Nothing came to me. It looked like the address was just that, an address. And so I coordinated with my supervisor to lead a team that evening down at Baker St. to see if we could find anything down there. I was secretly hoping that we wouldn't, and that this was just a wild goose chase, as I was terrified of what I would find down there if that was not the case. Later that evening, I showed up at 12 Baker Street with 3 of the finest men I knew. Thompson, a mountain of a man. who I knew firsthand could keep a level head in any situation. Ramirez, not as physically impressive as Thompson, but he had the brains to make up for it. His quick wit was known to save many a cop from danger. And Edison, an analyst both in the field and out, he somehow finds a way to keep one eye on every detail. I picked the best of the best to deal with the worst of the worst. Baker Street itself was a row of warehouse buildings in the industrial district, on the outskirts of town. All the warehouses were exactly the same, large, rectangular, and made up of red brick and mortar. Almost half of the warehouses were still in production, manufacturing different materials to be shipped across the globe, while the other half looked abandoned. 12 Baker Street was one of them. It had the signature, "There's nothing worth looking at here, look." Smashed windows, rubbish piled around the outside, bricks crumbling in a few odd spots, and doors set slightly of their hinges. But this was the place. I set my jaw and motioned to the others while slowly making my way through the already open front door. It took a while for my eyes to adjust to the dark interior, as I was opposed to using a torch in that moment. I could hear the unmistakable sound of water dripping from the ceiling into a hollow object nearby. The air seemed thick and musty, smelling largely of wet cardboard, and something more metallic. Blood. A tangy smell that quickly invades the nostrils, while leaving no room for other smells. I pushed on, my crew keeping pace behind me. Edison looked at me with a raised eyebrow, and I nodded to him in return. "This is the place," I had silently told him. "Be ready for anything." We passed through another set of doors, and came into a room dimly lit by an overhead light. And in the middle of the room, basking in the light, there was a person. And I say person very lightly. The average person has a neck 4 to 6 inches long, measuring from shoulder to chin. The person before me had a neck over 10 times that length. They were on their hands and feet, their necks sprouting from their shoulders like a vine and curling downwards. Their neck continued across the floor for about 5 more feet, before ending with a neck attached to it. The person saw us and began to slowly shuffle towards us, slowly dragging their head and massive neck along with them. They moaned mournfully as they moved, and I could see trails of blood slowly pouring from what seemed to be stitches every couple of inches along their neck. As they moved forward, their blood fell to the ground, spilling in all directions and leaving a bright red trail wherever they went. The person groaned again and looked up at us, obviously in tremendous pain. "What the hell is that?" Ramirez said loudly from behind me. I kept my gaze focused towards the person, towards him as closer inspection revealed. "I don't know. Another animal-themed abomination, by the looks of it." I stood my ground and watched, unsure of what to do, as he heaved his neck and the rest of his body towards us. He made eye contact with me and moved his mouth as if to speak, but all that came out were more ghastly groans. I understood what he was trying to say anyways, his mouth opening and closing in a circle-like shape, enunciating a one-syllable word. "Help." I stepped back, out of fear more than anything else. I knew that this thing couldn't necessarily do anything to harm me, but in the back of my mind, alarm bells were going off. "This is unnatural. People shouldn't look like that. You need to leave. Now." I could sense my team behind me tensing up and shuffling backwards, probably going through the same thought process as I was. The person continued to crawl forward, further extending the trail of blood behind him, his movements more slow and haggard. His life essence seemed to be dripping away from him, and it was obvious I was watching the final moments of someone tortured to the point of death. Once again, a voice began to speak. It emanated from above us, broken and distorted, probably coming from some sort of a system. It was calm and somewhat cheerful in the way it spoke, as if everything going on was just a normal occurrence. "Welcome all visitors to the newest attraction to the human zoo. A lovely giraffe, created by slowly tearing apart pieces of his neck and replacing it with larger, more appropriate pieces of human flesh." I winced. That did not sound pretty. A slow process, yes. But look at the end result. Isn't he beautiful? Undoubtedly, much better than his original form. Wouldn't you agree, Jonathan? I looked up, almost instinctively. That was my name. Anyways, I just wanted to say a big thank you for volunteering a rather fine subject to add to my collection. I just know you'll enjoy the wonderful things I have in store for you." The voice stopped speaking, and I became aware of two things at once. A sharp, loud noise of metal striking metal that was over just as it began came from the far right-hand side, on the other side of the room, a gunshot. And to my left, Thompson's leg seemed to jerk backwards, causing him to keel over and fall on top of himself, blood spurting from an area just above his knee. A bullet wound. I did the one thing anyone faced with an unseen gunman in a room would do: duck and dive for cover. Fear is a primary motivator, after all, and I was scared shitless. I found myself behind a stack of boxes, which, to my best guess, was blocking the gunner's line of view. I stood still, chest heaving from adrenaline and fear, and assessed the situation. Thompson was lying on the ground, unmoving. He must have hit his head on the way down. Edison was directly to my right, having chosen the same pile of boxes to hide behind as me. Ramirez was unaccounted for, and we had a gunman on the loose. It wasn't looking good. And then the overhead light turned off. Nothing makes your heart beat faster than the panic of suddenly being thrust into darkness. I heard the patter of footsteps ahead of me, close to where Thompson lay. It could have been Ramirez, looking to help him, or the gunner, looking to finish the job. I hoped it was Ramirez. I heard more footsteps, heavier, louder, more than one person. I contemplated making a dash for Thompson, grabbing him and getting the hell out of there, but he was too heavy for that. I turned to Edison to see if he had any idea what to do. When the light turned back on, I looked at my surroundings. The giraffe man was on the floor, unmoving, dead or close to it. Ramirez was slumped over a box on the far side of the room, dead or close to it. Thompson was gone. The gunner was gone. Edison helped me carry Ramirez back to our vehicle. He had bruises all over his body from what looked to be a fist fight, but he was still breathing for the most part. I couldn't say the same for the giraffe man, however. We had the rest of the warehouse swept, but nothing came up at all. It had apparently been cleaned of all evidence beforehand, in preparation of our arrival, or never even used at all. It was hard to fathom it all. I had lost Thompson, and come back with a man with a 25-foot-long neck instead. Thompson was out there, looking like God knows what. Ramirez was in hospital, badly beaten. Edison was shaken up, understandably. I was scared. Everyone was scared. But it was the words spoken out of that P, a system, that bothered me the most. The way that they said the giraffe, man's neck, was made up of much larger pieces of human flesh. As if they had more humans with them, and judging by the size of the neck, a lot more than one. There were people still out there, besides Thompson. A lot more people. I should start this by saying I'm not a detective anymore. After the events at the warehouse, I was paged to visit my direct supervisor, Sergeant Langley. She was sitting behind a mahogany desk when I came in, gazing at some sort of file. She looked up at me. "What the hell was that, Jonathan?" "We were underprepared, ma'am," I replied. She glared at me from across the room. "We have a man missing, and a severe casualty. How underprepared were you? Did you not take any precautions at all?" "With all due respect, you weren't there, ma'am," I said, upset. "Nothing could have prepared me for what I saw down there." "How would you expect someone to perform at their peak, faced with that? She sighed and looked down at the file, eyes skimming over the words. "The brass is asking I let you go, for the moment." "You can't seriously I began to say. She held up a palm. "Look, the media is all over this. For everyone's sake, including you." She jabbed a finger at me. "It's best that you stay out of this for the time being." I stared at her. She stared back and raised an eyebrow. I considered my options and begrudgingly decided to hand over my badge and gun. Langley smiled again. "Look, this will all blow over soon. Just take a rest for a while, I didn't respond. I left her office. It was 12, and I had nothing to do besides worry about all that was going on, so I went home and slept. I was exhausted after the past few days, after all. I awoke to my doorbell ringing. I was in that half-asleep state, so I covered my head with a pillow, hoping that whoever it was would go away. The doorbell rung again. I shifted position in my bed and checked my watch. 4 o'clock, Paisem. I was more tired than I thought. The doorbell rung again. I slowly got up and made my way to the door, brushing the sleep from my eyes. The door opened to reveal a scruffy-haired, lanky teenage kid who looked to be about 18. He nodded at me while smiling politely. "What do you want?" I said, not so politely. Yeah, I meant to drive you to this place. I mean, that is if you want to go," he said. I looked at him, trying to discern if he was serious or not. "And what's that supposed to mean?" He shrugged. "I'm not really sure. Someone came up to me and offered $500 to ask you to come with me. But you don't have to come either. I've been told to say the decision is up to you." A look of remembrance flashed across his face. "Oh yeah, I'm supposed to give this to you as well." He pulled a well-folded piece of paper out of his pocket and handed it to me. I opened it up and read the words scrawled inside. "Heard you're out of work. You should come join my zoo. We're always in need of more zookeepers." End of quote. The boy peered at me from behind the paper. "So what is it then? Are you coming or not?" I stared at him, blankly. What do I say? How does whoever wrote this note know I lost my job anyways? It only just happened. This is obviously a trap anyways. The kid could even be on it. The last time I followed one of these notes, I lost a man and almost got another killed. So what then? Should I go or stay? I looked back at the kid. "Yeah, I'm coming." The kid drove with that careful rigidness that all first-year drivers seem to have. He drove for a while, slowly taking me out of town and into the rural back areas of my city. It took another 30 minutes of driving along long stretches of road, the land becoming quieter and more desolate, before he pulled up onto a gravel pathway, which seemed to be the entrance of a much larger farm. I looked at the sign as he drove me in. Winston's Family Orchard. The gravel pathway diverted further up the track, and he took the right road. It ended up at what looked to be a farmhouse. There were lights on inside, and I heard the whir of machinery in the massive shed behind it. The kid stopped the car. "This is your stop. Hope you have a great evening, sir," he cheerfully said, allowing me enough time to get out of the car before he drove back down the pathway. I watched him until the headlights dipped below the horizon, before making my up the steps and onto the veranda. I could hear voices inside the house, talking, laughing. It sounded like any house at dinner time. Unsure of what to do, I knocked at the door. The voices stopped. I heard the soft pad of someone walking barefoot on hardwood towards me. The door opened. A man came out from behind it. He was of average height, cropped hair, and with 3-day stubble beginning to show. He stared at me with a faraway look in his eyes, before smiling, and gesturing for me to come in. "Glad you could make it. Dinner is just ready. Why don't you come join us?" His voice was deep and intoned, and familiar. Very familiar. I know you," I said, more of an accusation than a fact. I thought back to the memories of the night I found my sister. The paramedic who passed me the note that started all of this. The paramedic who always seemed to be gazing of into the distance. Number. Not just gazing. Searching. He tilted his head slightly. "Well, I'm happy to hear that. Makes acquaintances a bit more easier then. Come on, you look hungry, let's eat." I didn't move. "I'm not going to fucking eat with you," I yelled at him. "You killed my sister." He looked at me questioningly. Number, I didn't. I'm just a keeper. You've got this all wrong. I don't give a damn what you have to say," I retorted. "Hey buddy, let's calm down and talk this over a meal. I'm serious, come and join us." And with that, he walked back down the hallway. He turned left, into what I assumed was the dining room. I heard a couple of hushed voices and scraping chairs. It seemed people were leaving. I had two options. I could go in and find out what was going on, or I could leave and forget about all of this. There was one problem, however, I would never be able to forget. The pain would never go away. The horrors of what I saw could not be forgotten. I walked inside. I entered the room I saw the paramedic go through. Inside there was a table, set like it was ready to feed a large family. There was a roast lamb in the middle, with a few cuts already sliced from it. Around it there was various side dishes and drinks. There was a man seated at the head of the table, directly opposite to where I was. It seemed everyone else had left. The man spoke. His voice was rich and pronounced. "Isn't it great that we can finally meet, Jonathan? I have so much that I would like to tell you." "And who are you?" I asked. He chuckled. "All in due time." He waved his hand at me. "Come, sit, eat, anything you'd like. I do recommend the steamed asparagus, however." Bonnie really outdid herself there. I remained standing. He seemed unfazed and continued to speak. "Now, I would like to remind you that you came here of your own accord, and you may leave whenever you feel like. We are not forcing you to stay here, but I so would enjoy your company." He leaned back in his chair and folded his arms across his stomach. "Now, before I start waffling on, is there any questions you would like to ask? Any burning thing you would like to know?" It didn't take me long to think of a question. "Why'd you do it? Why did you kill all these people?" He paused for a moment, seemingly disappointed. "Straight to those questions, are we?" He sighed. "Look around at the world. What do you see? All I see is death. You, of all people, should know that. People die all the time, hundreds a second, thousands a minute. So what does it matter that I take a few more lives? It's just a drop in the bucket of death." He stood up. "And when people die, it's useless. Everything that they've ever done amounts to nothing in the void of eternity. But it's not just that. As a species, we are bringing ourselves closer to death every day. We cannot make the right choices, ever. So, on behalf of all of us, I'm choosing." I shook my head in disbelief. "Choosing what? You're just torturing people to the point of death? How is that supposed to solve anything? Do you still not yet understand?" His voice rose. "I am saving us all. I am leading the charge in the evolution of our species. In due time, I will be revered all around the world as the one person who saw what was right and had the guts to do it." He turned around to face me. "The first few deaths were unfortunate, yes, but they have helped the cause beyond anything you can dream of. I am so close to creating the perfect being, the savior of our species." He looked at me, jabbing a finger in my direction. "And you will join me, become a keeper, and embrace the new world." I was silent for a while. This guy is insane, I thought. Join him? Who the hell does he think he is? I'm leaving the first chance I get, but I had one more question I wanted to ask him. "Why me? Out of all the people you could have chosen, why me?" He smiled widely and let out a low laugh. "All of these smarts, and yet you couldn't figure that out? I didn't choose you. Look at you, quivering in a corner. There are so many more suitable prospects than you," he said with a hint of disgust. "Now tell me, what makes you think I choose you?" "I don't know. The notes, my sister. You just seem to be interested in me," I said. He chuckled again. "You really don't know, do you? Tell me, how often would your sister go for a walk at midnight?" "I'm not sure." "Never, I suppose. Then what was she doing that night?" The question struck me as odd. I had never thought about what she was doing, only about how it happened. I could never figure it out. The only way it seemed possible for her to disappear was if she had let it happen. But I ruled that one out early. She wouldn't just let herself get kidnapped, right? Right? The man arched an eyebrow at my silence. "You deserve the truth. Everyone does. Some people like to hide their secrets behind shadows and dark corners, praying they don't see the light of the day. I am not one of them. I strive to be open and honest in all that I do. I long for a world with no lies because there is nothing to lie about. Everyone is accepted. Everyone is valued. If you need proof, have I not told you my exact location twice now? That's hardly fair. You shot at us the first time," I said. "I did not shoot at you. You were just there. Look, I will explain to you everything. But first, I require something of you." He picked up a mug and started sipping at it. "Your loyalty. Tell me, Jonathan, will you join me?" "You're out of your mind if you think I want any part of this," I said resolutely. A smile curled at the edge of his lips. A pity. His eyes traveled down my body, seemingly gazing in everything. "Look at you, always slithering into situations you shouldn't have to be in. I think you'll make a fine snake." I heard a shuffle behind me, and turned around just in time to see a metal bar being swung at my face. It connected with my forehead with a loud crack, sending me flying backwards onto the ground. Pain. That was the first thing I remember from when I woke up. Hot, searing pain, burning throughout my body and culminating in my forehead. Pain. A throbbing sensation that shook my body with every strangely prominent beat of my heart, blurring my vision and deafening my eardrums. Pain. The metal floor was cold beneath me, drenched in my sweat. My arms were held down by some sort of shackle on each side, limiting my movement. I was trapped. With a killer. I panicked. I thrashed my arms against the shackles, on the blind hope that I'd be able to free myself. The pain on my arm increased, and probably caused a bruise. I yelled out in pain, but discovered I was gagged with a piece of cloth. Struggling's just going to make it worse, you know. A voice said behind me. The man's voice from the dinner table. Like I said before, you are free to leave whenever you wish. But since you won't give me your loyalty, I'll have to settle with something else. He walked around into my line of vision, holding what looked to be a saw. I'll make this quick, but I have to warn you, I don't like using anesthetic. The body should feel pain. It's natural. How else would it learn to heal? He walked around to the other side of me and turned on a camera that was held up on a tripod facing me. The lights blinked to signify that it was recording. He came back to me and placed the teeth of the saw on my left arm in the pit on the opposite side of the elbow. Now, snakes don't have arms, so I'll start with that. I struggled against the binds again. Adrenaline coursed through my veins from the fear, with no way to use it. Panic was setting in, and the human body's core instinct is self-preservation. And I was doing the best I could to get away from this. Don't struggle, Jonathan. It just makes it take longer. It'll be over soon. I promise, he said, in a calm, steady voice. And with that, he pushed the saw downwards. My body screamed with pain, and my vision blackened. I could feel blood seep out of the incision across the arm. He continued to bring the saw downwards, pushing it forwards and backwards, cutting through veins and arteries. I felt him hit bone. He continued to cut. I could feel the vibrations of my humerus being split in two. I lost consciousness for the second time that evening. When I came to, my gag was gone, and my arm. The remaining stump was wrapped up in a tourniquet and bandaged at the end. Everything still hurt, but much worse than before. Much, much worse. The man was still standing there, behind the camera. He seemed happy to see me awake. Had a good nap then? He walked over to where I was laying down and held my remaining hand in his. Everyone deserves a choice. Free will is what defines us. So I'm going to give you a choice. You could get up and leave right now and work for me, or have your other arm removed and your legs stitched together. It's completely up to you. Work for a madman, or die to a madman. Self-preservation is stronger than dignity. I want to work for you, I said, struggling between breaths. Very good. Let's get you out of those binds, shall we? He plucked a key from his pocket and swiftly unlocked them. I tried to sit up and promptly fell back down, my head spinning. The man started to walk away. Now, I'm going to begin your induction. You may feel free to leave or explore the house whenever you feel like. If you're hungry, there's leftovers in the fridge. As I said, we're not trapping you here. He turned and smiled at me. You're going to enjoy this, Jonathan. Toodles. He left the room and went up a few stairs that I hadn't noticed before. I took my time getting up, waiting until the earth stopped spinning under my feet. Walking felt strange without an arm. The weight was gone from there, and I felt lopsided and unbalanced. I took in my surroundings. It was some sort of basement under the house, with different types of surgical equipment scattered around. Besides that, there was recording equipment scattered around and placed at various places. A few were still on, but most were turned off. There was a door to my left, and the staircase directly in front of me. There was a placard on the door, with a single word on it. Elephant. I opened the door. It was dimly lit inside. The air smelled of musk and human waste. There was a small machine in the corner, lit up and whirring, with various cables hooked up to a large mound in the middle. The door slammed shut behind me. The mound moved. I took a step back out of fear. My focus shifted, and the horrible realization that I was looking at a person dawned on me. The person was extremely large, covered in layers of fat that rolled across their body. The person laboriously shuffled around to face me. The tubes from the machine connected into a mask that covered their mouth. The tubes continuously pumped a soft, gray liquid into the person's mouth. I had only seen something like this once before, when looking for a murderer who was hiding in an abandoned mental hospital, a force feeder. On either side of the mask, the person had two large metal spikes coming out of each nostril and back out the side of their head. Judging by the scars surrounding them, the spikes were drilled inside the cranium until they eventually came out the other side, through the nose. I shuddered at the thought. The person slowly made their way forwards, shoving themselves against the floor. The person looked up at me, directly into my eyes. I saw the pleading in them, the humanity, asking to be set free. And I saw something else, a flicker of recognition, of understanding. I looked closer, past what I didn't want to see, past everything I didn't want to think about, and I saw a friend. I saw Thompson. He was battered and beaten, and larger than he used to be. But it was still him. I rested on his shoulder and cried, long and hard. This, more than anything, broke me. Thompson didn't deserve this. No one does. I glanced behind me, at the saw that cut off my arm. I stood up and grabbed it off the table with my remaining hand. I brought it over to Thompson and held it over his face. His eyes grew misty, but he nodded, a slow and deliberate movement. He knew what it meant. It was going to be hard to cut with only one available hand, so I opted for a large swing and used momentum to get the job done. A clean cut that severed his jugular and removed his life from his body. I dropped the saw on the ground next to Thompson. I made my way up the stairs and out of the front door. I had no shoes on, and the gravel road was tough under my feet. But I walked forwards. I was leaving, and nothing would stop me. The man had said so himself, and so I left. But not forever. I will be back. For Thompson. For Alice. I've got nothing left to lose, and everything to gain. Story. I used to be a homicide detective. Now I work for a cult. I had three things on my mind walking home. Firstly, figuring out how to get a ride back home. My best guess was that I was a good 30-minute drive from any type of civilization. There was a small possibility a car might come along from across the distance, but the chance they were heading in the same direction I was even slimmer. I mean, I could probably manage to hotwire a car back at the farmhouse, but I didn't want to go back there, not yet. The second thing on my mind was my lack of shoes. The rocks were tough and sharp under my feet, scraping them raw with every aching footstep. I had settled on walking on the muddy yet less painful grass on the side, but I still wondered why. Of all the things the man at the table could have taken from me, he took shoes. It was a pretty clear answer, however. Mental games. He hires someone to drop me off in the middle of nowhere, with no feasible way of getting back. He knew the first thing I'd want to do is leave. So he took my shoes. He gave me two options, and he wanted to make one that displeased him hurt me, even if it was only in a small, petty way. Mental games. The last thing was that I had messed up. Badly. I had continually played into the man at the table's hand. He had always been 2 steps ahead of me, and in hindsight, it was foolish of me to go confront him. I suppose I had visions of bravado and of revenge, but all I had to show for it was one less arm and a dead friend. I can admit that I shouldn't have done that, but I can also change. One short phone call to the police, and I'd get rid of this nightmare. I had an address, I had a confession, I had evidence, and I had made up my mind. No longer I would face all this by myself. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and dialed 911. No service. Great. I continued walking for another 20 minutes before I heard the roar of a car engine behind me. I turned around. There was a car peeking over the horizon, coming from where I came from, and going the direction I was going. Perfect. It was an old blue Chevy that rumbled across the gravel, kicking up a plume of dust as it went. I stuck my thumb out. In that moment, I probably didn't look like someone you'd want to pick of the road, with missing shoes and only one arm, and all. but there was no harm in trying. I was hoping it was a kind farmer from hereabouts, heading to the main town to do some weekly shopping. The Chevy made its way to me, and I saw the driver eye me up and down before pulling onto the shoulder of the road. I opened the door and hopped into the passenger's side, thanking the driver. He shifted his position to look at me. Well, rather look past me. He had short, cropped hair, 3-day stubble, and a faraway look in his eyes, as if he couldn't rest his gaze, or if he was always searching into the distance. It was the paramedic from earlier. I opened the door and got out. I wasn't doing this again. I would rather walk home. The paramedic drove forward a bit, cutting me off from the road so that I would have to walk around his car to go forwards. I stopped walking. The paramedic got out of his car. "Hey, Jonathan," he said, waving. I didn't respond. He moved forward towards me and extended a hand. I didn't accept it. He held it there for an uncomfortably long period of time before placing it back by his side. "Look, we got off on the wrong foot here. The name's Michael. It's a pleasure to meet you again." "The pleasure's all yours," I said, dripping with distaste. He looked forward, his gaze shifting in and out of focus. "So, you called 911. I can't let you do that." "How did you know that?" I questioned. He shrugged. "GPS tracker, in your arm, shows us your location and interferes with phone signals as well. Took the liberty of inserting it when you were out cold. It wasn't a service signal problem then." He shifted position and leaned against his car. "So, I'm going to set it to you straight. Come back with us. You obviously can't be trusted to not go back to the police. Let's make this fair. We're not here to hurt you. You said you'd work for us. Come back, Jonathan." "And how would you stop me from going?" I said, tensing up for a fight. He shook his head, looking hurt. He grabbed his keys from his pocket and pressed a button connected to the keychain. I fell down in pain as a sharp, buzzing sensation shook my body, the intensity increasing every few seconds. Michael let go off the button. I forgot to mention, the tracker also doubles as a safety precaution. You just experienced setting 3. Trust me, you wouldn't like setting 8. He tapped his eyes. Messes up your internal hardware, as I'm sure you've noticed. Setting 10 straight up kills you. I automatically looked at my right arm. Inside of it, somewhere, was a small death machine. "So, Jonathan, will you come back?" I didn't have much of a choice. The drive back was uneventful and spent mostly in silence. Every time Michael tried to start a conversation, I brushed him off with one-word answers. I wanted to make it clear I didn't want to be here. He pulled up the small driveway towards the farmhouse. The man at the table was sitting on the porch waiting for me. He knew I was coming. He tells me I have a choice in whether I leave or not, but I never really did. The illusion of choice. Mental games. He stood up to greet me as I got out of the car. "Jonathan, you're back. I am so glad to see you." He waved me inside. "Come on in. I've got so much to tell you. The others are eating breakfast." I walked in with him, towards the dining room where I had first met him. Seated around the table, there was a large group of 19 people eating bacon and eggs, and various other breakfast items. I knew most of them. There was Scott Langley, slathering some butter on bread. She smiled and waved at me as I came in. Edison was sitting beside her, pouring milk into a glass. He turned away from me, not wanting to look me in the eyes, I suppose. He was embarrassed to be here. There was various other people I had seen in my time in the field. Other paramedics and police officers, politicians, journalists, doctors and surgeons, all sharing a pleasant meal together. In the house of a murderer. The man clapped his hands from behind me. "Okay, everyone, let's make Jonathan feel welcome around here. He's the latest keeper, but we're still expecting many more." "Welcome, Jonathan," a unison of voices said. I scanned the room, my throat dry and constricted. This was too much. The man walked away and beckoned me towards him. He continued to walk through the house, pointing out every room and giving a rundown of the layout. A kitchen, 2 living rooms, and 3 bathrooms spread across 2 stories. There was also a couple of bedrooms inside, but it seemed to me everyone was sleeping in tents outside. I inspected one more closely. "What are the cameras for?" I asked. The man chuckled slightly. How else do you think I get the money to pay for all of this? I turned around to face him, the cogs clicking in my head. You sell videos of people being tortured. He smiled. You get it. Torture porn is extremely popular in some places of the internet. It's not the main reason I do this, of course, but it helps the cause. The video of your arm being sold, for example, was sold for just shy of 5,000. He clasped his eyes behind his back, seemingly very pleased with himself. I paid to cut off a few legs, and then I have the money to cut off more than just legs. It's an endless cycle. It's perfect. You've seen firsthand the fruits of this system. He nodded towards the door on the side, still marked with elephant. He continued, That's where I keep my work, in progresses. Of course it's empty now, which is a shame. He was shaping up to be my best elephant yet. No matter, we've got a cat picked out and coming in soon. I shuddered at the way he talked about Thompson with such blasé, as if what had happened to him was a natural, everyday occurrence. It sickened me. There was no way somebody could do this all day and believe themselves to be good. There was something else as well, burning in the back of my mind. You said before that the night my sister was kidnapped, she was doing something that I didn't know. What was it? He was silent for a moment. How close were you with your sister? I shrugged. Close enough. We talked about once a month and came over every Christmas. Do you know what she did for work? Yeah, she was studying something, some sort of advanced anesthetic. She never worked it out, however. She did. He simply said. He waited for me to process that before continuing. I met Alice on an online forum. From the beginning, she fascinated me. She talked about how the world was corrupt and poisoned by humanity, and her ideas for rebirth and restoration. She had plans, Jonathan. So many plans. Everything you see here is a result of her work. We met up at one point and clicked. She was perfect. She was smart, and she was mine. Then, why did you kill her? I asked. I could see his eyes clouding up, as if he was on the verge of tears. Her anesthetic didn't work as intended. Instead of removing pain, it increased it. The way it truly works is beyond me, but even a little dose causes the most unimaginable pain. It feels as if your body is being removed from the inside and replaced with fire, atom by atom. Death would be preferable. But that's the thing, the anesthetic one, small side effect. It's downright impossible to die when the effects take hold. You just have to endure through the pain. So all the people I saw, I let my question trail of. It's easy to manipulate someone's body when they don't have the strength to retaliate, nor the capability to die. He paused, his body quivering with each shaky breath. Alice wanted to be the first. She wanted to be the pioneer, as the world transitioned into her vision. I begged her not to, as there were other, more suitable candidates, but she insisted. And so we staged a kidnapping. There was no evidence because there was no struggle. There was nothing. She came to this farmhouse and was the first person to be operated on that table. I spent years placing toothpicks in her skin while she was drugged up under her special anesthetic. She pushed through the pain and continued to talk to me, sharing ideas that I would have never thought possible. She told me to find others, in places of power, and if they wouldn't join willingly, then find a way to force them. Soon enough, they would come to realize we're working for the benefit of humanity. She told me to create animal-human hybrids to begin with, an evolution of our species. And the last thing she told me, before I laid her to rest in a park, was to find you, to hire you, to change your vision. And here you are. I stood in silence. I didn't know what to say. Everything that I thought I knew about my sister was shattered in an instant. I mean, it was possible the man was lying. There was no way she really was some sort of insane fanatical, hell-bent on torturing people. It just wasn't the person I knew. And yet, everything made sense. I didn't want to believe him, but I didn't see any way that I couldn't. He was right, and I knew it. The man looked back at me. Come, Jonathan. I've got one more thing you need to see. He led me up, out of the basement, and through the back door. He led me past a large vegetable garden and rows upon rows of tents, most of them unoccupied. They were expecting many more. I followed him past a fireplace, with upturned stumps placed in a circle around it, to the large barn behind the farmhouse. It was painted a classic red with a sloping roof and white barn doors. I could hear various noises emanating from inside, different loud sounds, moans, and scrapes, seemingly as if a large machine was inside, or a large number of people. "This," the man said, gesturing at the barn, "is my crowning achievement, my life's work. It is the beginning of the vision that Alice had for the world. This is where your induction will take place, and you will become a fully fledged keeper. You will learn to be a bringer of justice and a waymaker into the new world." He walked in front of me and opened the large doors, letting me take a glimpse inside. It was dark and musky. "Welcome, Jonathan," he exclaimed, "to the human zoo." I stepped inside. The smell hit me like a tidal wave. It smelled strongly of blood and fetid remains that permeated the air like a blanket. It gave me a nauseous feeling and sent my head whirling as it tried to breathe in clean air. It was no use. I felt a rush of bile spill out of my stomach and into my throat. I turned to the side and threw up onto the floor, and judging by the mess down there, I was not the first. There was rows upon rows of cages, all lined up from wall to wall. In each cage there seemed to be someone, and by the looks of it, most of them were already dead. Each cage was labeled with a different creature name. There was a worm, who had all of her limbs removed, and seemed to have segmented body parts every couple of inches, and was forced to crawl around by using her head as an anchor. There was various dogs and cats, long needles inserted into the cheeks in place of whiskers. They had everything below their elbows and knees removed, forcing them to walk on all fours. Other human animals had parts of their bodies elongated or exaggerate, turning them into various creatures. It didn't seem possible to look like that and live. All of the inhabitants of the human zoo were filthy and ragged, cramped up in small living conditions, and forced to eat small portions of what looked to be rotting meat, only fit for animals. When I walked past, they looked up at me with sorrowful, pleading eyes. They wanted freedom, just like Thompson. They were broken, and they were hurt. But they seemed resigned to the fact that they were going to live out the rest of their lives here. There was no resistance in any of them. There was no struggle. They had all given up. This place was hell. It was hard to think clearly. The smell continued to invade my brain and dampening my vision with black patches. My heart was pounding in my chest, a result of the horrors that laid before me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. This was all too much. The man continued walking forwards. "This is where I hold all current specimens before I decide to release them into captivity. And this is where you and all the other keepers will work, feeding the specimens, continuing their evolution, and cleaning their chambers." My blood boiled. He didn't care about the pain he caused. Nothing fazed him. "You're treating people like animals. This is inhumane," I yelled at him. He looked at me with disappointment. "Look at them. They are animals. This is all for the cause anyways. Later on they will be glad to learn that they were the first steps in the evolution of humanity." He led me forwards, until we ended up at a massive hole in the floor, in the middle of the barn. It was about 10 meters in diameter, and the bottom seemed to stretch downwards for 5 or so meters. There didn't seem to be any way in or out. The man spoke. "This is where every keeper before you has proved themselves worthy of keeper status. Your induction begins now." I felt a large shove on my back. The momentum carried my body over the edge of the hole, with my feet quickly following suit. In an instant reflex, I covered my head with the nook of my remaining arm and leaned forward, hoping to catch the grunt of the fall on my knees before rolling away. I landed with a large thump, which sent volts of pain rippling through my body and spread me flat across the ground. I laid there, still. The breath was taken out of my lungs, and my knees felt if they had shattered. I tilted my head up to get a clearer look at where I was. A small, dusty hole in the middle of a barn where people went to die. Nothing special about it. There was movement in the corner of my vision. It was something circling me, walking with a slight strut and over-the-top movements, as if it was hard to stay balanced. Every step it made caused a sharp clacking sound to echo throughout the hole. I slowly got up, despite the pain, I swiveled my body to the side to get a better look, even if it was under dim light. The first thing that made itself clear was that the thing had no neck. Its head ended at its shoulders. The second thing was that it had no eyelids. It stared at me with large, unblinking eyes, taking in every movement. The third was the sharp steel talons that protruded from every fingertip. And then it opened its wings. It spread its arms out wide to reveal a quiltwork of human flesh stitched together under its arms. It looked at me for a few moments, head cocked, arms in a display of aggression, then it swiveled its head around. A full 180 degrees. I was looking at a human owl. The owl lunged forward, talons aimed directly at my chest. I lunged to the side, fearing for my life once more since the past few days. I wasn't fast enough. Its talons ripped through my clothes like butter and left 3 large gashes across my chest. I ignored the pain and immediately turned around to face the owl. The penalty for letting my guard down would be death. The owl was still facing the inner wall of the hole. It twisted its head around to face me, its large eyes looking at me with an intense hatred. I panicked and hopped backwards, aiming to avoid another attack from the owl. But then I came to my senses. If I was going to survive, I knew I had to make a move right away. The longer I tarried, the weaker I would become, and the lower my chances of living through this would become. I threw myself at one of its wings, hoping to bring the owl down. It avoided me. In a lapse of judgment, I forgot to realize there was still a human under all of that, wanting to avoid death as much as I did. I rolled backwards and leaped to my feet. The owl lunged at me again, talons extended. My first instinct was to dodge once more, but I suppressed it. The owl would be expecting that. I instead waited until the last moment and threw myself into the steadily approaching owl. I caught it off guard. The owl flailed backwards, stumbling under my weight. I dug my fingers in the small gap between its head and shoulders and started tearing of the stitches that held them together. The owl continued to thrash, realizing what I was doing. It dropped to the ground and tried to claw me of its back, but couldn't reach because of its wings. I continued to tear, one after another. I could feel the tension loosening. Another couple minutes of this, and I would be home free. The owl's movements started to decrease in intensity, and Hit seemed to realize the battle had been won. I removed on last stitch, and the rest of the owl's head came off easily, dripping with blood. I threw it to the ground and collapsed, exhausted. I woke up in one of the bedrooms. My chest hurt like hell. I sat up in the bed and pulled the covers away. There was 3 large scars across my chest, painful and tender to the touch, but obviously treated by someone. I looked outside a nearby window. It was the dead of night. I couldn't hear any noises inside, so I assumed everyone was outside in a tent, sleeping. Everyone except the man. He was sitting in the chair and simply watching me sleep. Mental games. He looked at me as I stood up and raised an eyebrow. I began to walk over to him, despite the pain. He clasped his hands together. "Well done. You are now a keeper." I continued my slow journey. "You asked me once what my main purpose was in doing all this. It's for everyone. You, me, all the peoples of Earth. Humanity is the highest life form. I am treating it as such. With my guidance and your help, humanity will enter a new era, a new evolution." I still made my way towards him. Everyone's outside. I'm alone with him. This was your sister's vision, and then it became mine. I am eager to see it become yours. He tensed up in his chair slightly. This is not the only human zoo out there. We have spread our philosophy, and we are many. But go ahead, kill me. Continue the cycle. You will follow your sister's footsteps and lead the world into salvation. I didn't think about it twice. I grabbed a vase of the bedside table and ran at him, weapon raised. There was a flash of fear in his eyes. Clearly, he didn't actually expect me to do that. He wasted precious seconds fumbling for his keychain. I swung the vase onto his head. He pressed a button on his keychain. The jolt of electricity struck my entire body. The pain was so much worse than I had previously experienced. Each separate buzz sent my entire body thrashing against itself. I tried to push past the pain and get a hold of the button, but I couldn't move by myself, let alone think. Setting 10 will straight up kill you. My vision turned a searing white. I could feel my organs vibrating within myself. The pain was endless and unrelenting. This was how I went. The electricity was frying my insides, turning it into a liquid mush. And then it stopped. It took a while to regain my vision, but even then it was unfocused and blurry. The man was still lying on the ground, breathing but unconscious. Pieces of the vase were still ingrained into his skull, sending small trickles of blood down his face. I removed one and slit his throat. It wasn't the death he deserved, considering all that he did, but it was what he got. I stumbled out of the room to see Edison pouring what looked like to be gasoline on the floor. I tensed up, ready for another fight. He put the gasoline can down and put his hands up. "Hey man, you can relax. I'm the one who helped you out there. You would have died if it wasn't for me." I scanned his face, and I believed him. I put my fist down. He continued, "I hated it here as well, but I could never find an opportunity to strike back. What you did was very brave." "What are you doing?" I asked. "Blowing up this fucking hellhole," he simply said. We worked together for a few hours, silently and in the dark. He had almost finished with the farmhouse, so we moved on to the barn and finished with the tents. We ended up at Michael's car, and Edison handed me a lit match, signifying that he wanted me to do it. I didn't give a damn anymore. Everything could burn. I threw the match into a puddle of gasoline and quickly drove off with Edison before the small fire turned into a raging inferno. We were about 2 miles out when the night sky was lit up in a burst of white light. It was done. Edison turned to me. "Where are we going then?" I gazed into the rearview mirror, watching the horizon be engulfed in flame. There was the wail of fire trucks moving in from the distance. Someone must have called it in. I looked forward, at the gravel road in front of me, pondering the question. Home. Story. I collect murder memorabilia. I bought something found at a crime scene which changed my life. I saw the violin case listed for sale online. I browsed the website for 15 minutes before I found it. The requirements for buying it should have been a red flag. My curiosity got the better of me. I decided to go along with the necessary steps to complete the transaction. I am an avid collector of murderabilia. If it is an object related to true crime, I must own it. While I am judged for this fascination, I have an unwavering interest in items of that name nature. Potential boyfriends have decided against dating me. Paintings by John Wayne Gacy on my wall have not helped. I went to the house of the seller, a 2-story duplex with a V-shaped roof. I had a printout of the object. I knocked, and the man answered. He had on a gray sweater, and when he smiled, his teeth were white but crooked. I gave him my screen name and reminded him of the email I sent him. "Oh yes," he said with a grin. "The violin case was next to the body of a victim. She looked quite a bit like you. It's speculated that it belongs to the killer. The motive behind why he would leave it is unknown. Some are unsure if it's meant to throw the authorities off, to make them believe he is a musician. Either way, you want to buy it?" "Yes," I said. "I know exactly where I will keep it." "How much?" $600, he said. I gave an affirmative nod, and he went into the back of his house. When he returned, he held the violin case in his arms, as though it was a newborn. It was rosewood, and only had a few noticeable chipped cracks. The price he gave had not changed from the listing. I brought along the appropriate amount of cash and handed it to him. He gave me the case. As I turned around and returned to my car, he snapped his fingers to get my attention. "One other thing," he said. "I would never open up the case if I were you. I've heard stories of bad things happening once the seal's broken. Some have stated it's cursed by a necromancer of the olden days. It is difficult to measure based on the weight if an instrument is in there. Regardless of how interesting it might be to look at, I would be grateful for the exterior of it and leave it at that." I tried to thank him for the warning and drove back home. The case sat on top of my clothing drawer for at least a week. I displayed it on the stand, with a note below it describing its origin. On a quiet Saturday evening, I was at home decluttering when I received a text from Jason. He asked me if I would go to dinner with him. He had already made a reservation for a fine dining restaurant downtown. I said yes, since we had already been on a few dates in the previous months. They had gone well. I slipped on one of my nicer black dresses. After I applied makeup, a knock on my door filled the air. I answered, and Jason stood there with roses in one hand and chocolates in the other. He wore a suit and had on a very expensive Kenneth Cole brand watch with a silver and blue band. "Your gifts couldn't be any more cliché if you tried," I said with a smile. I took them and set them down on the coffee table. "You look amazing," he said. "I'll have to tell the waiter to keep his eyes off you." I smiled. I invited him in because I needed to find some of my jewelry. I went into the bathroom. I searched around behind my sliding glass mirror doors for one of my old necklaces. When I walked out, he was gazing at the violin case. "When did you buy this?" Jason asked. "I used to take violin lessons as a kid. My mom pressured me into it as a way to rebel against my father. All he wanted me to do was play football, and he saw the arts as emasculating. I don't remember much of what to play, but I know enough to impress you. I know some Paganini." "No," I said, "but thank you. We should get going. I don't want someone else to take our reservations if we don't show up on time." "We have plenty of minutes left," he said as his hand graced the case. "Please let me swoon you with a classic song. It would be my honor. You won't believe the notes I can nail." I watched in terror as his hands began to inch towards the clasps to open it. I lunged at him and grabbed his wrists. My palms clutched his timepiece as I kept his hands together and folded them into mine. "I'm not ready for anyone to open it yet," I said. "I know it's strange, but you have to trust me. Let's go to dinner. I'm getting hungry, and we don't know how bad traffic is going to be." I leaned in and kissed him. His scent was of sandalwood and citrus. After our embrace, we left my apartment. I did not know until later that he had undone one of the clasps. All I can remember of the rest of the evening is how well the meal went. We had several courses. I drank at least 3 glasses of red wine, which was more than I intended to indulge in. The couple beside us were elderly people from the East Coast. They were on vacation and talking at a high volume about their stock investments. I could recall having ordered a rum milkshake topped with banana slices. There was a live violinist who walked between tables and played romantic melodies. He took song requests of everything from classical to top 40. Jason was polite enough to not mention anything about it. I feel he was disappointed in me for not allowing him to show his musical talents. I have no recollection of when the bill came, let alone when we departed the establishment. I cannot remember if we took a cab or if he was sober enough to drive. I could not recall if we went back to his place first, or if we went straight to mine and made love. I blacked out. When I came to, I was in my bed. A headache attacked every microfiber of my being. Nausea overcame me. I was groggy and felt as though I could have slept for another few hours. The gap of time I had somehow lost disturbed me. I knew there was not enough alcohol in my system to cause such erasure of my reminiscence. I checked my phone for new text messages and did not find any. I squinted in the darkness and noticed the violin case looked different. Someone had left paint marks on it, which I knew were not there beforehand. I sat up and felt lightheaded. I was going to pass out. I turned the lamp on my nightstand to bright. Once my bedroom was illuminated, I saw strange symbols created with crimson fluid on my walls. Moonlight poured in through my window and gave the redness a shimmering quality. I stared at the violin case again. It shifted to the left on top of my dresser. What I could only halfway rationalize as not being blood poured from the sides of the violin case. It was also cracked open. I saw something behind the hinge. It did not look like an instrument or anything mechanical, but something fleshy. I neared it and dropped my phone in a puddle of carmine after I fumbled to try and catch it. The bottom of my feet was slimy with the cherry-hued dampness as I walked towards the case. I took a deep breath. I opened it. I ran to the bathroom and almost slipped on my way there. I threw up in the sink. I crawled over the messy floor in search of my phone. When I retrieved it, I saw that the screen was now scrambled anytime I turned it on. I went to the next door neighbor's place and begged them to call the police. An old lady answered the door. For a second, I thought I was going to give her a heart attack based on the bloodstains on my skin and dress. I do not remember if it was 5 minutes or several hours before the authorities arrived. They cordoned off my room with caution tape. They gave me a full medical assessment in the back of an ambulance that one of the deputies had called in. They determined I did not have any observable injuries. A uniform with a badge came in and started asking me questions. Her name tag read S. Brown. "Is Jason okay?" I asked. The deputy shook her head. "I'm sorry to say he was under a bridge downtown this morning when we found him," she said. "His body had washed ashore. He may have been floating out there for 2 days." I began crying. A severed human hand was there. The fingers pointed skyward. Adorning its wrist was the same Kenneth Cole watch I was so familiar with. Circling the stump were other pieces of jewelry. I was unable to distinguish them as belonging to anyone I knew. One of the first things she wanted to know was why I had so much crime scene evidence from other homicides. "It's a morbid interest I've always had," I said. "I'm someone with a fascination for the darker side of things. It doesn't mean I glorify the people who commit the actions." "That's not what I'm talking about," Brown said, as she looked at me with a startled expression. "The jewelry and pieces of clothing found within the violin case. They belonged to 20 other victims of the violinist serial killer. Who sold it to you?" I gave her the address I had driven to the day I picked it up. I even gave her the name of the man who had put the piece up for sale. After the interview was complete, Brown told me I could stay in the room. I could not believe that no one had cleaned up the scene. She told me they could send someone out to mop up the place, but it would be another day. I told her I would not cross the threshold of the apartment until then. I would stay at a Best Western in the meantime. There was so much I wanted to ask her. How did the case move on its own? Someone bathed in blood and wrote all those occultist symbols on the walls. Then they escaped without detection. It all seemed so irrational, but I knew she would look at me like I was crazy if I tried to describe everything. I had dealt with something inexplicable and paranormal. No one can convince me otherwise. I used the Motel Business Center to Google if they had apprehended the guilty person. I found that they had knocked on the door of the same house I bought the violin at that day. It was empty. The belongings were all removed. The man had fled. Story. I'm on jury duty for a very strange case. Let me first start by saying there will be no real names or locations given in this, because it would be illegal for me to do so. It's illegal to discuss a case you're a juror on outside of the courtroom, much less post about it on a public internet forum. Now that that's out of the way, let's get to it. I was called for jury duty, which began about 2 weeks ago. I went to the courthouse, had my interview conducted, and a few days later got a call saying I'd be seen selected. The trial started on Wednesday. What's more is that strange things have been happening not only to me, but to a few of the other jurors as well since the trial started. The case. On trial is a man named John Willis. He is charged with the brutal murder of his wife and his sister. John is 32 years old, graduated from Penn State University, and moved to our city for a job as an environmental engineer. This doesn't sound too strange when said out loud. But as they say, the devil is in the details. I can only describe the photos of the crime scene, as I obviously don't have copies of them myself. The second photo depicts his late wife, Jessica. Kind of. What happened to Jessica might actually be worse than Erica, all things considered. Jessica's body is folded up in a suitcase. A small suitcase. The kind that's about as big as you can have while still calling it a carry-on on a flight. From what I can tell, all of her bones had been broke away from the joints, meaning they were manually snapped in half with force. Her fingers, toes, arms, legs, ribs, everything was broken, without breaking the skin. She was folded in such a way that the bottom of her mangled feet were flush with her ears, and her arms were bent backwards at the elbow, so her palms were flat on her shoulder blades underneath the rest of her body. It's absolutely sickening to look at. The last display was actually more of an array. It showed the house in the condition it was in after the bodies had been removed. Evidence markers littered the floors and walls, but what was most evident was some kind of substance. I can't really describe it. It was like chalk dust, but black. Pure black. It was all over a bunch of the house, inside and out. They haven't yet revealed to the court what it is. The array of photos basically shows the bloody house, the hallway that was home to the closed doors of 2 bedrooms and a home office, an open and a closed bathroom, and 2 attic openings. Upon the revealing of this photo array, I distinctly remember John's eyes getting wide with concern, and him whispering to his attorney, John Willis. As I said, John Willis is a 32-year-old male, a graduate from Pennsylvania State University, and an environmental engineer. He is a small man, I'd say about 5'8", maybe 130 pounds. He doesn't look to me as anyone who has ever been accused of being intimidating. He was born here and went to Pennsylvania for school. He then moved from Pennsylvania back to this area when he was 24 years old for his master's degree and met his wife a very short time after. They married 8 months after meeting. He had always been very close with his sister, especially after their father passed when he turned 20. Their mom passed away from cancer when they were young. The years following their deaths saw them grow much closer than ever before. He let Erica live with him and his wife for the first year of their marriage. By that point, she was financially stable enough to get a place of her own again. By all accounts, John seems like a relatively timid person. He had never been charged with a crime before this, and his only run-ins with the law were 2 citations, one for parking and the other for speeding. It started off like any other court case. Both the defense and the prosecution gave their opening statements, blah blah blah. Then, a complete overview of the events that led to the discovery of the bodies was presented. The night of the crime, around 8:30 p.m., John Willis called the police and informed them that his sister was dead and his wife was missing. They played the 9-1 -1 call, and in it, John sounded seriously distressed. The problem was, John said he was home the whole time, sitting in his home office, working. He didn't hear any kind of disturbance. He claims he got up to go to the bathroom, and that's when he found his sister impaled in the hallway. Police showed up, and after clearing everyone out of the scene, the detectives went around the house looking for anything noteworthy, and came across a suitcase that was zipped up all the way, except for a very small portion at the end of the zipper. Inside the suitcase, they found the grotesquely folded up body of Jessica Willis. After finding no evidence of a break-in, and nothing pointing to an outside party being involved, they placed John under arrest. At this point, we were let out for the day, but that night, strange things began happening. First night, I got to my house around 7:30 p.m. As soon as I stepped foot out of my car, I felt a strange feeling, the ever so common scary story trope of being watched. I looked around but saw nothing. I went inside and was going to make some dinner when all of my lights flickered. After a few seconds of flickering, they all went out. But even the light from outside went away. It was as if I had gone blind. I fumbled around, trying to find my phone to call 9-1 -1, as I thought something was wrong with me. Suddenly, light flooded into my eyes. It was almost blinding in the reverse way as I had just been. When my eyes adjusted, everything was normal again. The only thing different about my house was that there was black chalk dust all over my dining room table. I went back to the courthouse the next day, and on a few of the other jurors, there were looks of fear and confusion. There was a woman there, Jackie, who looked particularly disheveled. I asked her if she was okay, and she told me what had happened to her the night before. Jackie's first night. Jackie was in bed, almost asleep, when she heard her bedroom door creak open. Assuming it was her cat, she ignored the sound. Then she heard it creak closed. She shot up in bed and peered over at her door. She felt that something was in her room with her, but couldn't see anything. Her cat wasn't in her room, and she lives alone. Then she heard breathing. Deep, guttural breathing, but like it was attempting to mask its sound. She was curled up in her bed, more afraid than she'd ever been. She felt the covers get tugged down from the foot of her bed. She closed her eyes and prepared for the worst. She said that after what seemed like an eternity, she heard her door creak open again. She opened her eyes, and the feeling of company was gone. Her covers were pulled almost to the end of her bed. She stayed awake, sitting up in bed until morning. When she got up, she saw on her doorknob that there was a black dust similar to the stuff in the crime scene photos. Court that day was postponed until Monday for reasons unbeknownst to us. Nothing has happened to me today so far, but it's getting dark now, so we'll see. I'll report more after court on Monday. If you are upset that I am breaking the law by posting this, do not comment on it. Your thoughts have already been iterated by numerous people who can't understand why I am posting what's going on. If you are interested in contacting a judge, court clerk, or any other member of the court regarding these posts, good luck. because you have not and will not learn my location. This is not about me breaking the court's rules. This is about me seeking help with a situation I do not know how to handle. So I posted the last one and got a few people freaking out about the fact that I'm on a jury and posting about it online. The fact is, I'm not looking for opinions on the case. I am impartial when it comes to the trial of John Willis. All that information is just background. What's really concerning me and causing me to post this are the things happening outside of the courtroom since this trial started. So please, if you have a moral objection to what I'm doing, keep it to yourself. Also, the Willis case is happening in a relatively small town and isn't getting any mainstream coverage. Hell, it's barely getting any local coverage. So, yeah, let's get to it. I had to go out to store Saturday afternoon, and when I opened my car door, I had that black dust stuff on my hands, like it was underneath my car door handle. I still had, and still have no idea, as of the writing of this post. Anyways, on my way to the store, I heard something shuffling around in my back seat. It freaked the shit out of me naturally, but I was driving on the freeway, so I couldn't exactly pull over and stop just then. I looked in my rear view and saw nothing. Just to be sure, I quickly looked behind me, and I'm not really sure what I saw. There was something like hiding under a black cloak. I let out a yell, and when I looked forward, I almost rear-ended the car in front of me. I collected myself and looked back again, and all that was there was a bunch of the black dust. I made it to the store and back with no further problems, although I did check my back seat every 10 seconds on the way back from the store. I got home and unlocked my front door, again getting black dust on my hands. I, of course, figured this must mean that whatever going on was either happening in my house currently, or it was from what happened the night before. I got in my house, and nothing seemed strange. I went about the rest of my day. Nothing happened until night came. I was sitting in the living room on my laptop, and I felt a breeze. I was an extremely cold breeze though, like I had just opened a walk-in freezer, but even colder. I hadn't opened any windows. It's November, and I know I didn't have my air conditioning on. Again, it's November. I got up to see where the draft was coming from. I walked down my hallway and saw that the window in the bathroom was open. There was, of course, black dust on the windowsill. I figured this meant something was about to happen. I went back and sat on the couch, ignoring my computer and focusing completely on the room in front of me. I stayed there, on high alert, until I fell asleep. When I woke up Sunday morning, still sitting up on the couch, I felt like something was different, but I couldn't place it. I got up and cautiously walked throughout my house, trying to find something that was out of the ordinary. I couldn't find anything, but I just had the overwhelming feeling that something had been done. Most of Sunday went by okay, but then the sun set. Right at dusk, I heard a banging coming from my attic. Now, I'm the kind of person that will do everything I can to justify something before beginning to look for answers in the paranormal, supernatural. I reasoned that it was some kind of animal that had gotten into my attic somehow. I heard scurrying around all above me like a squirrel running back and forth. Then suddenly a loud boom came from the area above me. Then I heard sliding, like someone was dragging their very large feet across the attic floor. I called the police because I'm not stupid, and they came to check out my attic, which of course was empty. They did ask me what the black dust all over the floor in my attic was, to which I had no answer. The police left, and both of the officers gave me their cards in case I had any further problems. At about 11 p.m., shortly after the police left, I heard a crash and something slide in my hallway. Before even looking, I knew that it was the drop ladder to my attic. Something had either pulled it down from below or pushed it down from above. Or, I thought, the police hadn't locked it in place when they exited the attic, so it had fallen. I walked towards the fallen ladder and suddenly, as if someone had flipped a switch, an extremely bright light shone from the attic into the hallway. I stopped dead in my tracks and waited for something else to happen. The light seemed to get brighter and brighter until it was almost pure white, to the point it was hurting my eyes. Then, as quickly as it had started, it stopped, with what sounded like the light bulb in the attic exploding. I heard the familiar sliding sound go from the door to the other side of the attic above me. I ran and shut the drop ladder and made sure the lock was properly set. That was the last issue I had on Sunday. Today, I reported for court at 9 a.m. Today was the day for witness testimony and cross-examination. Witness for the defense number 1, Rebecca Damone. Rebecca Damone is John's next-door neighbor. Her initial statement was gathered during canvassing of the area, which she reiterated for the court. She mentioned that she was in her backyard doing some gardening before it got too dark, and that at one point, around 7:45, John walked into his backyard, where they exchanged a wave, and he walked back into his house without doing anything outside. Shortly after that, she heard one scream, and one scream only. She said it was a short yelp, not like someone was getting hurt, but like someone had jumped around the corner and scared them. During cross-examination, the prosecution asked her if she was sure what she heard was a scream, if it was in fact so short of an instance. She said yes, and that it absolutely came from the house. The defense then asked Rebecca to disclose her relationship with John, if any, and what she thought of him as a neighbor. Rebecca said they'd been neighbors since he'd moved into the house next to her, and that he always seemed like a friendly man. He and his wife introduced themselves upon moving next door to her, and said that they always looked seemingly happy. She did say that one night a few weeks before the murder, John came to her house and asked her if she'd hear anything in her attic lately. When she said no, he just stood there staring into her house until she closed the door. That was the only issue she'd ever had with him, and said she would regard him as a fine neighbor. Witness for the defense number 2, James Bradley. The extent of James Bradley's testimony was the information that John had called him multiple times regarding strange things going on in his home. Feelings that he was being watched, things out of place, something paranormal. The prosecution basically just grilled him on being a paranormal expert, and essentially tried to paint the whole profession as a joke. Witness for the prosecution, number 1, Amanda Clement. Amanda was a friend of John's sister, Erica. She informed the court that Erica had recently been proposed to, and was considering moving out of the state, as her now fiancé's new job was transferring him. She had been with Amanda, getting coffee, just before she went to John's house and was ultimately murdered. Her plan was to tell John the news. Witness for the prosecution number 2, Anthony Mineo. Anthony Tony Mineo was quite the witness the prosecution brought forth. He was, apparently, the paramour of Jessica Willis, as they had been carrying on a clandestine relationship for nearly 2 years. In Tony's opinion, John had found out about it and murdered her. The prosecution corroborated this by presenting text messages from the day before the murder, in which Jessica discussed the fact that her husband might know about their affair. It was all pretty damning evidence. The defense cross-examined Anthony, and in all honesty, kind of made fools of themselves. They basically had him restate what he'd already said, and then sort of flat out asked him why the court should believe he himself didn't do it. As if he was some scorned lover who couldn't get over the fact that she wouldn't leave her husband, even though there was no basis for such an insinuation. That's when I noticed the defense attorney acting strange. He was like mildly twitching every few seconds and had a look of fear in his eyes I'd never seen. Now that I think about it, he looked like that the entire day. At the time, this made me think of Jackie. I looked over to her. She was 2 seats away from me, and immediately noticed bags under her eyes. I looked at the others, and about half of my fellow jurors looked as if they hadn't slept since the trial began. When we were excused for the day earlier around 3 p.m., I gathered the ones that looked particularly disheveled, and we all stepped into the room that held the vending machines and discussed our individual problems. Here are the few that really stood out. Juror number 3, Mike Forsyth. Mike was sleeping in bed with his wife and woke up when he heard loud, exaggerated breathing. He turned over and saw his wife was sound asleep and that the breathing wasn't coming from her. He then got worried, hoping that it wasn't their dog. He got up to look at the foot of the bed where their dog slept every night. As he was sitting up, he stopped when he saw someone standing in the corner. They were facing him, but in the dark, he couldn't make anything out. He said whoever it was very tall and looked as if he was wearing a cloak. The person in the corner then slowly dropped to their knees and began crawling towards the bed. Mike jumped up out of the bed and turned on the bedroom light and saw no one there, only a black dust streak where the thing had been crawling. He called the police, who came and took his statement and looked around. His wife said she hadn't seen or heard anything and was convinced her husband was just dreaming. although unable to explain the black dust on the floor. Juror number 11, Trinette Bryant. Trinette lives at home with her 2 sons, with a boyfriend who is a truck driver, so he's not home most night. On Friday night, her 2 sons ran to her in the middle of the night, they share a room, saying someone crawled out of their closet and into the living room. Trinette said she got up and grabbed the knife she keeps in the drawer of her bedside table. She told her sons to stay in her room and close the door, and only open it if she came back and said their safe word. She didn't mention what it was. Trinette then crept through her house, the upper unit of a duplex, turning on lights as she went, and was able to make sure no one else was in her home. What she did find, however, was a trail of black dust, leading from the closet in her kids' room up to her front door, which she said was now unlocked. She mentioned that she doesn't trust her downstairs neighbors, so she never ever leaves her door unlocked. She opened the door, and the trail continued into the stairwell and stopped just underneath the opening to the attic. Juror number 9, Lysandra Morales. Lysandra was cooking dinner for her husband, waiting for him to get home from work, when the entire kitchen, which was sweltering due to both the oven and the stovetop producing heat, went cold. She said it happened in a split second. At first, she thought she just had the chills, but then they didn't go away. Then, she heard a sliding noise in her hallway, heading away from her. She said she froze in fear for a moment, then grabbed the largest knife she had in her kitchen and peeked around the corner. Something draped in black was on the floor of her hallway, sliding down the hall. She began tearing up when she said that it was trailed by the black dust and that it stopped underneath her attic. She quickly ran to her living room to call the police, and by the time she looked again, the thing was gone, with no trail past below the attic entrance. The police showed up, looked around her house and in her attic, and found nothing. According to Lysandra, it had holes where its eyes should be, and rotting skin that was falling off its face, as if it had been flayed with a cheese grater. It had teeth that seemed to go on for rows down the back of its throat, not sharpened, but broken, like if you snapped a stick and it wound up with multiple points. During the time it was getting closer to her, dread consumed her. When she couldn't take it anymore, she looked towards it, and it was gone. I decided to take the advice of several Redditors and resolved to stay at a hotel for the night. I packed up a small bag and stepped out my front door. As I was locking it, I heard something slide around inside. I walked over to my window and peeked my head around to see in. There was black dust everywhere. It hadn't been there when I was in the house seconds prior, but it was all over my living room, television. The part of the dining room table that I could see was covered in it, and the floor in the hallway had it all over the floor and walls, even the ceiling. I got in my car and got the hell out of there. The nightmare. At the hotel, I was actually okay. Nothing directly happened to me, but I did have the most vivid, terrifying nightmare I've ever had. In the nightmare, I'm at my house, and I go to the attic. I feel that I don't want to go, but something is compelling me to do it anyways. I walk below the door and look up, and I can hear breathing from up above. I reach up and let down the stairs, and black dust falls off it as it lowers. I look up into the darkness of my attic, and I see 2 spots that are darker than the rest of the attic, if that makes sense. I stare deeply into these 2 small endless pits of black and begin to ascend the stairs. Suddenly, something grabs me from behind, and I'm swung like a horizontal pendulum from the stairs to the hallway wall, which has had all of its slats broken. I'm impaled, but I live. Then, something I can't see takes me off of the wall and begins breaking all of my bones individually, eventually stuffing me inside a small suitcase. Then I hear the words, "Go up," and I jolted awake. Now, we all know what the dream was. It's a recreation of the murder I'm on the jury for. I'm also pretty sure I can discern what "go up" means. Probably means go to the attic. Like a dumbass. No thank you. I got up to go to court this morning, and on my way out, I was walking down the hall and noticed a small pile of the black dust in front of a utility closet. I didn't stop to find out why it was there. Trinette and Lysandra went to the judge this morning and told him about what's been happening to us. They said that the judge brushed it off, saying the connection of the black dust was thin at best, but that we could talk more after the day was over. Let me get to the court stuff. They had the lead detective testify, as well as the officers that first arrived on the scene and the medical examiner. Then finally, John Willis himself. Detective Alan Potts. Detective Potts was assigned the murder and testified that he couldn't see what other explanation there was for the murders besides John Willis. Coupling the fact that his wife was cheating on him and his sister delivered potentially upsetting news, there was motive and opportunity. He said it seemed like a crime of passion, aside from the broken slats in the hallway. They had no way of proving when that was done. There were two things that didn't make sense to him, though. One was the black powder that was present at the scene. The other was the fact that John is a small, meek man. He doesn't look as if he would be capable of breaking all of his wife's bones so precisely so as to fold her and put her into a suitcase, nor did he outwardly have the medical know-how. That being said, though, looks can be deceiving, and we can't know beyond a doubt that he didn't in fact possess that knowledge. Along those same lines, it doesn't seem as if he'd be able to lift his sister up 2 feet and impale her. He said that despite these inconsistencies, he firmly believes that John Willis is guilty of the murder. Officer Joanna Presley. Officer Presley and her partner, Nathaniel Danwright, were the officers who responded to John Willis's 911 call. She reported that they arrived to the scene and saw John sitting on his front porch with blood on him. Not absolutely covered in blood, but a substantial amount. He seemed extremely distressed, and his demeanor did not match that of someone who just carried out a double murder. He refused to go back inside and kept telling them not to go near the attic, over and over. He said, "It's watching him, and it got what it wanted," multiple times as well. In his initial statement, he claimed that, "It came down from the attic, just like I knew it was going to. It broke my wall all at one time and slammed my sister on it. Then it took its cape and swarmed my wife, and when it got up, she was a pile of a human being. There was a suitcase out already, so it slid it over and put her inside it and closed it." He recanted his statement about his wife later on, stating he didn't see what happened to her, which is why he didn't report that she was in the suitcase, leaving police to find her themselves. Sketchy, I know. Chief Medical Examiner Glenn Loof. Glenn Loof did the autopsies on the bodies. Despite their appearances, the victims did not die how you'd think they did. They were both suffocated. This means that Erica was alive for a time while stuck on the wall, and Jessica was alive entirely during the process of having all of her bones broken. The black powder recovered at the scene was also in both victims' lungs, and the rest of their primary organs showed signs of burning, something he'd never seen outside of a death caused by fire. The black dust was tested, and no match could be made. It has no earthly qualities. It is absolutely not anything the scientists assigned to the case had ever seen before in their long careers. So I'm no closer on that. And finally, the only person who really knows what happened, John Willis himself. Testimony of defendant John Willis. John started his testimony by telling us he was not crazy. He insisted that what he was about to say was the God's honest truth. For about 2 months before the murders, he was experiencing weird things in his house. It would be unseasonably cold in his house at strange times. Things would move around his house. He kept finding black dust everywhere, and he became convinced someone was living in his attic. He tried getting help from a paranormal investigator, but couldn't get one out to him in time to look into it. He said a creature came to him in his dreams and told him he wanted him, that was all he wanted, because he was special. He couldn't just take him. He could offer himself, or it would take someone he loved. He said he never offered himself, and that's why it took his wife. He figured it took his sister, as it was opportunistic. She was never a target. He said his wife was planning on leaving that night, as they had had a big fight about her ongoing relationship with another man, and had taken a suitcase out of the attic and almost tripped on her way down, letting out a yelp. He claimed he was sitting in the living room at the time, talking to his sister about his issue with Jessica, when Erica got up to go see what had happened. John followed, and that's when it happened. The thing came down from the attic. As it lowered, the drywall tore off the slats, and they folded down while breaking at the top. It turned around and basically stretched out an arm and swung, lifting Erica off the ground and onto the impromptu spikes. Then it turned to Jessica and enveloped her in its cape. It stood there for about 10 seconds, then let her go, and she was just a pile of skin and broken bones. It then slid the suitcase over, opened it, placed Jessica neatly inside, and zipped it almost all the way shut. It then retreated back into the attic. He said he loved his wife no matter what, and hadn't been told the news from his sister yet, so he had absolutely no reason to harm either of them. Court was adjourned until tomorrow, where we will hear closing arguments and start our deliberation. The affected jurors got together and went to the judge, then went to the court cafe and talked. The judge said he was going to think about all of the information we presented to him and speak to us in the morning, so now we have to get to court early. As I said, we then went to the court cafe and had a conversation. It turns out, we all had the exact same dream. All 6 of us dreamed the exact same thing. We all wondered why we are having these things happen to us, and the rest aren't. And it turns out I got off pretty easy last night. Trinette said her sons opened the attic hatch in their apartment because they heard an animal up there, and when they did, a bright light filled the hallway, and it got down to about 40 degrees in their house until she closed it. Mike had entered his house and seen something crawling through his living room, leaving the trail of dust behind it. Mike said he gave chase to it, but after it turned a corner, he couldn't find it. Later in the evening, he vomited a black sludge. One of the jurors I haven't yet named, Marcus Hightower, said he pulled into his driveway and saw a face in his upstairs bedroom window, and that it was the most evil thing he'd ever laid eyes on. He felt its hate for him and everything else in the world. All 3 of those jurors and their families spent the night in hotels last night. Tonight is the last night before the end of the trial. I have no reason to believe that whatever this thing is will not step its game up tonight. And I have a theory about what's going on. I'll reveal my theory tomorrow, mostly because I don't want to sound stupid. Thank you all for your help and for taking the time to read about my plight. I truly appreciate you all. The last night before the jury deliberation brought forth only one thing: a terrible nightmare. We were all sitting around the table, discussing aspects of the case, most notably the inconsistencies in the defense. It seemed like a relative slam dunk. The affected jurors seemed fine, and didn't bring up the oddities that have been plaguing us. Then, something atop the drop ceiling scurried around. We all look up as black dust drops onto the table. There is a knock on the door. The bailiff opens it from the outside, and in walks Anthony Mineo, the lover of the late Jessica Willis. He does a lap around the table as we sit silently. He then drops to his knees and chants something I can't remember. The whole ceiling above the table falls, seemingly from the mountain of black dust resting on it. From the dust comes the form of the entity that has been plaguing us for the last week. It gets bigger than I could have imagined, and take one whole side of the table, both affected jurors and otherwise, and envelops them in his cape. When he retracts his arm, the revelation is gruesome. All the people that were covered by the cloak, or cape, whatever it was, are basically sitting piles of skin and organs, their bones seemingly removed. The entity jumps off the table and grabs the person who is trying to get the door open to run, but having no luck in opening it. It then balls up the woman like a piece of paper, blood getting everywhere, and tosses her to the side like nothing. The rest of the jurors, besides myself, suddenly spontaneously combust. They run around screaming, but no smoke is coming off them. Only more black dust falls where their skin should. The thing then jumps back on the table and crawls towards me. I'm sitting at the end of the table, in shock. It inches its way towards me, and I finally see its face. It's exactly as Lysandra described. Pure evil, hate, rage. All the negative emotions wrapped into one horribly twisted face. It lunges at me, and I wake up. It was easily the most vivid nightmare I've ever had. I called Lysandra, who coincidentally had had the same dream at the same time. As we would soon find out, all of us affected did. All of this had something to do with Anthony Mineo. Myself and the rest of the affected jurors met at a 24-hour diner near the courthouse shortly after. It was about 4 a.m., and talked until court that day. It turns out, Trinette had forgone her outwardly displayed sanity and asked the other jurors if they had addicts, to which most responded, yes. So we still don't know why we were chosen instead of the rest of them. It was time for court, and we walked into the courtroom, the 6 of us weary about what might potentially happen. Both sides made their closing arguments. The defense basically threw us away and just begged us to find him not guilty. He looked so disheveled. Surely someone in the building had asked him if he were hungover. His eyes were baggy, and I noticed black on his fingertips and palms. He looked worse than we did. It was finally time for our deliberation. None of the affected jurors sat at the end of the table. Of course, 6 of us held out, while the other 6 immediately said guilty. Then began the long explanation of what had been happening to us, and why this weird lady was inquiring about all of their house's attic space. They looked at us like we were crazy, rightfully so. We sat in the room for hours, trying to convince them that something else was going on, and to look past the obvious pitfalls in the defense. We said that whatever this was affecting the defense attorney too. It came time to go outside and tell the judge that we hadn't yet reached a conclusion. We all walked out, and I saw the defense attorney open his briefcase. When we delivered the news that we hadn't yet agreed on a verdict, the defense attorney took a revolver out of his briefcase and handed it to John Willis, who promptly put it in his mouth and pulled the trigger. The defense attorney followed suit, killing himself as well. There was an unmistakably inhuman shriek that followed. We barely had time to react before we were taken out of the courtroom and placed back in the deliberation room. We were there for what seemed like hours, but was in reality only a few minutes. We were recused from our jury duty and informed that police would arrive soon to get our statements, which they did. Everyone told what they saw and we were released. I returned to my hotel room, hoping the ordeal was all over. Boy, was I wrong. I opened the door to the room, and it was covered. I mean absolutely covered, from floor to ceiling, wall to wall, with black dust. Naturally, I went in the room and investigated. Just kidding, I ran out of there like I stole something. Doing what I should have done immediately after being released, I regrouped with Marcus, another of the affected jurors, and we decided to see what was up with Anthony Mineo, since he had appeared in all of our dreams. He lived just outside town on a small farmland property, and as soon as we got there, neither of us felt welcome. There were strange things hanging from his trees, sticks that made weird shapes, hay bales in certain patterns that I can't rightfully describe. We walked up to his door and knocked. He opened his door, revealing himself to be dressed in a hooded robe, with black makeup painted on his face in different shapes and patterns. Before we even got a chance to say anything, he spoke. He lives above, and he takes below. Hello to you too, Mr. Mineo. We asked him what has been happening to us and why, what happened to John's family, and why John and his attorney killed themselves. Surprisingly, he answered our questions relatively straightforwardly. What happened to John and his family? Anthony became fed up after his 2-year affair with John's wife. Years earlier, he had lived in New Orleans and became a practitioner of hoodoo, you all called it. He decided to get rid of John by using a certain spell to conjure an entity that would kill him. Only the plan backfired. The entity became infatuated with John and wanted nothing more than to consume him and make him his own. Apparently, John refused to give in to the entity, and as punishment, it killed his wife and sister. Why we have been affected, and not other jurors? According to Anthony, this entity feeds on belief. It's relatively simple, actually. The more someone believes in and fears the entity, which does indeed have a name, I just can't for the life of me pronounce it, let alone spell it, the more powerful it becomes. It wears down people's faculties, drives them nearly insane, then takes their mind and soul back to hell with him, where they apparently live as his eternal slaves. The reason we were affected is because it saw victims in us. We were near enough to John that it observed us and knew it could take us. The reason the other jurors weren't affected was simply that they don't believe in the paranormal or supernatural. I thought I didn't believe in this stuff, but apparently I do. Apparently I do enough to the point that I've been giving this thing power. It can be many places at once, and it always takes up shelter in the areas above someone. If someone didn't have an attic, he'd stay in the rafters underneath the roof of the home. If you lived in an apartment complex underneath someone else, it would stay hidden in the upper units area, leaving no trace besides a trail of black dust. Simply put, the more you give into it, the more powerful it becomes. Why John and his attorney committed suicide? Anthony's answer for this was pretty straightforward. They killed themselves because they realized they would never stop being taunted by this entity, and took the only way out they knew. Makes pretty good sense if you ask me. What we can do? Of course, we asked Anthony how we could end this curse. He gave us a list of instructions and some different spices, salts, and plants with directions on how to use them. Kindly enough, he gave us enough to distribute to the rest of the jurors, all while apologizing to us profusely, saying he never meant for anyone else to get hurt because of this. He said we must follow his instructions to the letter, or we would lose the battle and be taken down to hell with the entity. No pressure. We left Anthony's and regaled the information and distributed the items amongst them, and all went our separate ways, getting rid of the entity once and for all. I followed Anthony's instructions as closely as I possibly could. First, I had to go back home and put the salts and spices around the entrances, exits to my house, doors, windows, etc. Not to keep the entity out, but to keep him in, because he's already here. He apparently preys on you when you're tired, and according to Anthony, can only take someone to hell at precisely 10:28 p.m. Don't ask me, I'm not the magic entity bringer-upper. Then, I took a bunch of the herbs Anthony gave me and crushed them up as best I could. I put them in a circle in my living room. I then took a bunch of the black dust I've been finding everywhere, from a bag of it Anthony gave me, and covered the crushed up herbs in an effort to disguise it. The reasoning for this is that when the entity travels back to hell, it does so through a portal made from its dust. I would agree to join him in hell, and when he would enter the portal, he would be trapped within the circle of herbs, which he cannot cross back from. Anthony explained that he can willingly cross into them, but not out. Then I waited until 10:20. At that time, I began calling out for the entity, saying I'd given up and wished to join him in hell. It took until 10:24 for me to hear the attic stairs fall down, and then to hear the entity slide his way down the hall. It reached my living room and stood up in front of me, and I'm not going to lie, I peed my pants a little bit. I'd never gotten a look at this thing from the front before. Its body underneath the cloak was hard and scaly, a dark green color to its cracking skin. I've already described its face. It stood nearly 7 feet tall, having to duck under the banister into my living room. I again stated I'd given up and wished to join it into hell if it would only lead the way. It walked up to me, and I stood ground. It loomed over me, as intimidating as something could ever possibly be, and breathed down hot, putrid breath upon me. I nearly vomited when I inhaled it. Black dust fell from its shoulders onto me. I claimed I constructed a portal for it, and again, that I wished to join it in hell for all eternity, if it would just lead the way. It stared at me for a few moments, then turned to the circle I'd made. It apprehensively went towards the circle, inspecting it, looking back at me to see what I was doing every few seconds. Eventually, it stood just outside the circle and presented an arm, welcoming me into the circle.